Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. So, Dan, absolutely fabulous to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be. I've been following you for some time. You're a comet streaking across the whole thought leadership spectrum, and it's great to be in the trail today, or maybe hanging on to the comet with you guys. So, pleasure to be here.
Well, I love it when people say things that are patently not true, but I love hearing it. So that's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
I call it like I see it.
Well, listen, this whole kind of proposition for me of doing the podcast is reaching out to people that I find just of interest. I think have got something to say and have an inherent credibility. So, that's right back at you, and we'll get into the episode. So Dan, I know who you are. I always say this at the start of these episodes because I've invited you on. So just Dan, introduce yourself, tell the world what you do, what your energy is and what you put your energy into, and then we'll get into the session.
Well, there was a great Sting song many years ago where we sang about an Englishman in New York, and I would just say I can't sing like Sting. Love the music though, but I'm a American guy who's hanging out in Munich, Germany. So born in the Midwest, some time in California, been here now for 30 years. And I'm a happy family man, have a very balanced life, and I'm absolutely passionate about leadership development. And I believe that leadership is everything to the success of a business. And that's kind of my professional brand, if you will. But there's a lot more about me, and perhaps we'll get into some of that over the course of our conversation.
Well, we were chatting before, and I think I'll just want to kick off with how, one of the things that came to my attention, which is your book. I think that's always, having done one, I know the anxiety it put me through. So I always want to respect anybody that's got one. And I'm just going to hold that up. So we've got, Executive Ownershift by Dan Norenberg, and I'll put the link in, the description. So creating highly effective leadership teams. So, that was a great read. And I think I'd like you to bring that to life a little bit. I think it'd be just great for you to say, do you know what, if somebody said, why should I read it? What would the answer to that be?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe before why you'd read it, I'd say who I think would be interested in reading it. Then maybe that comes to the why. I think that if you're a professional leader who's in a leadership team, it's sort of aimed at the executive team and the strategic teams below, but really any leadership team or member of that would be interested. I think if you support leadership teams, so if you're an HR professional or an external consultant, I think there are some very practical tips and tools and systems that you can use to support your practice. And thirdly, I think if you're just interested in personal development and continuous improvement, I've tried to write that book in a way that not only has captured experiences from literally over 100 leadership teams around the world, but also some of my personal experiences growing up in this journey of going from a small village in Iowa, not too far from where Bill Bryson grew up, to now living in Munich and supporting global leadership teams. So that's, I think, who should read it, and maybe a little bit about the why. But maybe I just say a couple things. I came to Europe sort of by accident, short holiday with a backpack, didn't know anybody, didn't speak any German, didn't have any sort of legal right to stay, but I learned that if I set myself up as a consultant, I could stay. So I sort of set myself up in Munich as a leadership coach and communication trainer, and worked with Siemens for 3 years. And then I started my own leadership boutique called Envision Learning, ran that for 25 years, worked with about 25,000 people. During that time, I got invited into the C-suite. Somebody would say, senior head of HR would say, hey, we like what you're doing in talent management. Our executive team's struggling. Could you give them a hand? And I was sort of, flattered, a little chuffed that they would ask me to, speak with their senior leadership team. And I'd say, yeah, I'd be happy to. And there's always sort of a gentle touch on the arm and say, well, don't get your hopes up too much, because they've already had 3 consultants already this year. So, and maybe it'll be interesting to hear your experiences too on this, but what I saw when I stepped into the C-suite, so I didn't come, as a former CEO, I didn't come from one of the big consulting companies. I kind of came in through the streets, through the bottom, up into the C-suite. And what I saw were hugely talented people, very ambitious, with a lot of intellectual firepower, a lot of knowledge about the business, but really as a leadership team, as an organizational unit, they didn't really play very well together. And they didn't realize this and what impact it had on the business. So I started using some of the tools and insights that I had to develop those. And that's basically what the book is. Now, 15 years later, I've had over 1,000 conversations with executive and strategic leaders about the condition of their leadership team and the impact this has on their business culture and their organizational results. And I first put the book together just for me as a sort of a handbook that I could go back to. And then I thought, well, maybe my clients would be interested in this. And I started expanding a little bit, and then it became really a labor of love, but it's not easy. There were some early mornings where I'm thinking, what's next? But I'm really happy with the book. And I often go back to the book for insights and help even today.
It's interesting when you talk about this process element of what a business is versus, the human being applying the process. And it's a conversation that I have a lot, which is, I've come to refer to it as almost the lens and the tool. The tool might be the pen, but the lens is, the manner of application, right? I can stab you in the arm with it, or I can write a poem with it, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. The pen is the pen. So the process is the process, but the lens is the human beings or the collective teams lens on, okay, but who are we going to be while we're doing? And that's if I'm hearing you there's something that says when you're, it was interesting that you said that maybe they don't recognize their impact. And I've probably come to the belief that I think they do, but it's what I would class as, that Johari window, open, blind stuff, but actually it's what I class as willful blindness.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm blind to it. I mean, I might be blind to some of the impact, but actually I kind of know. But if I act like this, I get left alone, and we don't have to have the truly honest conversations, and it doesn't hurt me then emotionally, and and I don't know if that resonates with you.
Well, it certainly does. And, and I don't mean in any way to slag off on executive leaders. I mean, they've got a really tough job. These men and women have really tough jobs. There's a lot of pressure. They've got a lot on their agenda. There are more topics they could possibly deal with. Everybody wants their time. And what happens is they often fall into, trying to fix the business and fix the problems in the business, which is, let's say that's a noble effort. But they don't practice the oxygen mask rule. They don't take care of themselves first. You've got, and that's not being selfish. You've got to be able to self-regulate. And if you don't have a leadership team, that's working at its best and playing at its best, how could the rest of the organization do that? And the other thing that's quite interesting, and this is the fascinating part for me. So part of my work is about working hands-on with leadership teams. That's what I really enjoy doing. Working with teams, coaching and consulting them, and inspiring them to look at things in a new way and enabling them with some new tools, and then getting out of there and letting them do their things. They don't need legions of consultants to transform their business. I believe leaders can do that by themselves. But if we look at we've never had a time in history where we had more tools, more inventories, more opportunities, more resources for leaders to really play at their best. I mean, business schools, consultants like you and I mean, there's so many resources. You would think that we would have an overabundance of absolutely phenomenal leaders, and we'd have so many companies that would be just an abundance of companies with an extraordinary leadership culture. But unfortunately, this isn't the case. If we look at statistics on engagement and on strategy implementation and on transformation projects, and I believe we're at a turning point, we're at a crossroads, because I believe that for the last 50 years, we've done some good things in leadership. So I don't want to say that individual coaching is not good. I do that as well. It's helpful. Individual talent programs are helpful. But what we fail to do is we fail to shine the light on this, the top-down approach to leadership as a team construct. And I believe this is the next big transformation, or the next big opportunity for breakthrough, and learning and development. And I believe that we've spent far too much time coaching players and sort of ignoring the teams for some of the very reasons that you mentioned. It's one thing to go off with a coach. There is some progress there, but I'm working in confidence, maybe in quiet. Sometimes the executive leader will allow you or I to be a fly on the wall, which even enhances the opportunity because then we can share what's really happening on the field. But when a leadership team opens up and starts to learn together, coming back to one of your previous episodes, which I loved, if leaders have to learn, you have some good insights in there. I believe that learning together it's like going back to Reg Revans talking about set learning as a group, powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think that is hugely powerful. I mean, people talk about team builds and let's go off and do some kayaking or something like that, and I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It is. There are many experiences to be had there, but I think learning together is actually its own team build, and I don't mean you don't learn through experiential experiences. Yeah. That's not what I mean, but that learning a language. If we were all going to learn Esperanto together, which was going to be that global language, if we all sat in a room and said, right, this leadership team is going to learn Esperanto. Why? Just so we share an experience of learning. Even if we did that, the sheer angst of having to learn it together, to support each other, to help. And by the way, you can't leave the room until you can all speak it semi-fluently.
Yeah.
All right. So what would the support be? What would the conversations you'd have to have with each other? It would, that mechanic of learning together, I think, is huge.
And that's absolutely brilliant. I love your metaphors. I love the way you put these metaphors together. And I agree with that. What I would add in the reality of today's world, and this is where there's a misconception that I'm sometimes dealing with in leadership teams, where I talk about this executive ownership. This is learning at the highest level, and this is taking ownership for the small shifts in the team that create a big impact for the business. It's not about pulling people out for 2 weeks and going off to an island or sitting in a classroom. This is what we would say in German, and forgive me because I'm living in Munich, it's called a Begleitungsprozess. So you accompany the leadership team. So they're actually doing their business, and the interventions or the learning is happening in real time. That's why I'm a huge advocate of just observing executive meeting for a half a day.
Yeah.
The team will take away several things that will not only improve the quality of that leadership meeting, but all those leaders will be able to take that back to the meetings that they run. So you could call me an old-fashioned fundamental guy, but I don't care what sports you're playing or at what level you play, the Dirk Nowitzkis, the Michael Jordans, the top people in the top teams, every season they all go back to fundamentals. And I think that you're also a steward of fundamentals because you're also in martial arts.
Yeah, and when you say that, it just made me smile because I see certain people now doing online learning for martial arts systems, and I go, well, good luck with that. Because it's not that you can't learn, and if you're of a level, you can absorb information because you already know how certain things work. But nobody ever got better without being observed. And by trusting the input. And I notice, in your book, that very first sort of 1.1 of the first chapter is vulnerability. And that, that willingness to kind of, especially in the martial arts, any sport, how do you get better? Oh, through constant failure. And that willingness to expose yourself and to not see vulnerability as making you vulnerable. And that's quite a step, especially for, people that have built their careers on that sort of be strong driver, right? That holding to that. So I think there's a lot there about that observation and the reality of being observed and how real you're going to be while I'm observing you.
And there are multiple benefits of that too. You obviously, you don't learn to swim by holding onto the side of the pool, right? I mean, you've got to get out in the water and you're going to struggle and thrash, and then you have somebody there to help you. So, and I even opened that book with that story of vulnerability. My father was a football coach, and, I was just a small boy, and these huge men are coming to the door at night, these huge men. I mean, these are like giants. I'm from the Midwest, and people are big back there. And they'd be all kind of broken down and crying. And I'd ask my dad, I didn't even know who it was. And he'd say, well, so-and-so's having tough time right now, I'd say a tough time. That guy was like all state for you. He was the quarterback. He was like divisional champion. And my dad would say, hey, sometimes we're all faced with a situation which is too much for us to handle. And at the time, the story didn't really connect with me, and then it was later when I started working with leaders that I saw one of the distinctions between high performance leaders and highly effective leaders are those leaders that are comfortable with themselves and can say like, hey, I'm struggling with this, or, I got some feedback that I'm interrupting people in meetings and this is disturbing and I want to work on that. If I interrupt in the next meeting, I'm going to pay, 10 pounds into the pot for every time that I do that, it turns that behavior around right away. And I think when leaders, men and women, can come together and be, to a degree, intimate with themselves and share what they're struggling with. This is also a revealing thing I'll say in a leadership session. I'll say, take a piece of paper and write down the personal and professional struggle that each of your colleagues are going through. And people just set their pen down and say, what kind of question is that? And I'm saying, where are these people supposed to get support, if not in the leadership team? And somebody will say, well, that's the CEO's job, or that's the senior leaders team. It's the team's job, and we need to be able to be forthcoming and share what I'm working with. And the knockdown, the compound effect, which was your point, is that when you express that vulnerability, you also give people permission to express their vulnerability. That's powerful. And that only happens in an environment of trust and safety. And that doesn't mean you can't go out and rock the world, but that's key.
I really think it is. And as I hear you talk, I reflect. It's interesting when you hear, you've got two people who are in the same space, and you align somebody's vocabulary to your own, and so I can kind of make sense of it for myself. So I often play these things back to check in if I've understood, right?
Cool.
And I never forget somebody saying to me, well, Guy, it's about me. I want to be unconsciously competent, and I go, yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Because, if you're driving a car and you hit fog, the last thing you want to be is unconsciously competent, right?
Yeah.
Because that's fatal. You've got to snap into conscious competence. Mm-hmm. You've got to really listen. You've got to adjust your speed. You've got to really, and if it's what we call in the UK a real pea super, and you can't even see the end of your bonnet, you better be consciously competent. Yeah, and that Reverend thing that you quoted, back to there, that seeing learning as a craft, I think is very interesting. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I really endeavor to go slow to go fast with the team, which is, and as I've matured, when I was, go back a couple of decades, I was just all about showing you everything that I knew. And I'll teach you loads of stuff, right? And you've learned loads. What I realized is, of course, if you don't have a relationship with learning that is actually personal to you and then shared as a narrative amongst the team, so you actually are going to see learning as a craft. You're going to be consciously competent. That's the bit that I think is, because I think a lot of senior people have gotten out of the habit of learning unless it's to solve a in the moment problem.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. That's really, really interesting. And going slow to go fast, that's, I think, a sign of your maturity as a coach and consultant. I'd like to think that I'm, in that same field with you on that. And, my background, I studied psychology and criminology. I wanted to go to law school, and I thought before I go to law, I want to change the criminal justice system of the world. This was my mission at that point. Did some work in prisons, taking young people into prisons, interfacing with prisoners stuff. But anyway, went to California, decided, I'll do 1 year of business, because if I'm going to be a lawyer, some business knowledge will be helpful. Got into business and really, really loved it, and started managing people at a very young age. And, in leadership, there's 3 core things to do, right? Engage other, really engage people and lead meaningful change and create results. And I think I was very good at creating results. Not so good I was so good on the others, but the point I wanted to make is, as I moved and transitioned into coaching and consulting and advising, there was still that strong driver in me, my personal identification with creating results. And coming back to what you said about going slow to go fast, it's very easy if you have a group of men and women who are a leadership team. They've got a lot of meaty topics that they feel they need to, decide things on and do. So it's sometimes very easy to slide into the business issues, a very strong results orientation, when in fact what the team might need is to go slow about, what's happening under the water or what's happening in the interpersonal relationships, or like you said, what is my relationship with learning? What is my role as a leader? Is it to have the answer in that snap decision, or is to recognize that, hey, the answer that I have might not be suitable, and it certainly doesn't help the person who's asking me the question to develop their own process of learning. So I sometimes will painfully slow down a workshop until the pain threshold is so high that we get to the crux, or what's the blockage in the team. Maybe it's about people aren't speaking together in an open way, or whatever that is. But it's usually I'd be interested in your views, but I find the work with leadership teams is a real balance between, it's not soft, touchy stuff. I mean, maybe there's a canoe ride in the evening or something like that, but it's a balance between that group dynamic, what's happening in the team, how do I feel, and also what's our business agenda and how are we driving that and how are we prioritizing that and how we communicate that. So I find you sort of balance between if you will, hard and soft issues, although I'm not so sure I like that terminology myself.
Yeah, it is fascinating. So somebody says soft skills to me, I kind of almost have a kind of Tourette's-like moment where my eye starts blinking.
I was 2 cups of coffee and it slipped out, but it's not the.
No, you're right, because it's the vernacular, and that's fine. But I go, well, if anything, they should be called the flipping hard skills. And I think you're right. I think there's a lot to be said about that willingness of a team. And many moons ago, we all have failures, right? We all have moments where something doesn't quite work. And I have one which I absolutely remember, where and the word failure is an interesting word, because even now I go, I think I did everything I was supposed to, but it just went wrong. Yeah. And it went wrong for the following reason, which was, I sat with the CEO and went, listen, we're going to enter into a space where, you're talking to me about what's not working and blah, blah, blah. So when we get into the next 2 days, there's going to come a point, and, and when we're there, I'll just kind of hold my hand up to you and look at you knowingly, as in referencing, we've just got there. And it's the moment when at least one person will not want to do this. And if you allow them to not do it, we're kind of done. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you've got to hold space with their anxiety. Mm-hmm. Are you prepared to do that? Yes, I am. Absolutely. Okay, fine. And I never forget, we got, a point of the way in. I said, really like to move into that space where, I'd done a diagonal cut where I'd spoken to people in the organization. Let me play back the feedback as you're seeing the shared narrative. Mm-hmm. So I played that back, and this individual went, so why is that aimed at me? I go, well, no. I asked the question, when you think of that senior team, when you think of your senior team, give me some thoughts around that. Yeah, but it feels as if it's aimed at me. It was very interesting. And of course it wasn't, but it was just their anxiety. And they took umbrage with it. And the MD said, well, maybe we could do something else. I said, well, we can't do something else, because there's nothing else to do unless we face into this. Yeah. And I think I find that whole setup for the way that, and, the reason I'm bringing that up is I think the work with senior teams is precarious. That hasn't happened to me now that was over a decade ago. Because I've now found a different way of contracting and ensuring, and also being more clear whether or not there is an appetite to step into that space. But the reason I offer this is, I think leadership development done right has an edge to it. I think there is, I don't know if I want to use the word danger, but there is an element of uncertainty. We're about to go into this kind of unknown space, and you're all going to have some reactions that you might not be familiar with dealing with in open forum, because as senior people, you can often self-isolate yourself.
Yeah, good point. Very good point.
We're about to un-isolate ourselves. And so your vanity, your ego may not have been tested for over a decade, if not longer, depending on how how much of a big cheese you've been for and for how long. And I think that's the moment where the test comes, not in does the model work? Yeah, the model works. That's not the issue. Right. Yeah. But actually, it's when you get to those conversations and how neatly people can be led there or want to step into that space. And I think that's, just hearing what you say, it just made me think of work being edgy.
That's just fascinating. Fascinating the way you describe that. In that moment of truth, I think all, consultants that work, particularly at a very senior level, there's a lot of power involved and influence, and people can, reject something. Sometimes it's happened on the lower levels where people just go along with it. And that was a moment of truth that just didn't come through. But then you learn to, adapt to that and deal with that and whatever. And sometimes in that situation, I'll use the issue of silence for sometimes maybe even 10 minutes. Like, let's just sit with this for 10 or 15 minutes and think about what's really going on right now, and maybe, and somebody comes forward and said, hey, this is a point we've been at 3 or 4 times or 5 or 6 times, and we just never seem to get over that. And then there's some other ways, maybe in smaller groups, to address that, maybe with a partner walk or something, because the smaller the group, the greater the intimacy. And so that's always a point there. But I think it's just fascinating. And if you look at the comfort zone, which, like you said, you can build to sort of self-isolate. The idea is to get into the stretch zone, and at times we'll touch the panic zone, which we don't really want to get into for extended period of time. But sometimes we have to touch the panic zone to know where the limits of the stretch zone is. And I think that's what our work is about: is helping, making sure contractually that the people that we work with understand that we respect the challenges they have in front of them, but we're also here to sometimes bring some tough love, if you will, and to confront them on things. And I even say something in the book about, the respect I have for the people that I work with and how much I learned. But at the very senior level, the tone and the tempo is different. They're surrounded by people who tell them what they want to hear. And I think, and that's what I like about you, and what I like about all the stuff I've seen that you've done, is I think you call it like you see it. And maybe my American way, I do that in a slightly different way, maybe not as craftful as you do, but I think we both call things like we see it. And I think that's why we're respected by the people that we work with. So, yeah.
There's a phrase there which just jumped into my mind, which was, in the UK, we use that phrase, which is the Queen thinks that the world smells of paint because there's somebody 3 feet in front of her painting the fence, right?
Yeah.
And it's that analogy, I think, for leaders that is very, the phrase I often have when I'm in my sales pitch, which is be careful what you ask for. Because the challenge of doing real work is something that actually, everybody says, don't waste our time. Everybody says we want to do something real. In fact, the reason that they often hesitate to want to do leadership work is the fact that the experiences before have been quite bland. They've been overly educational, or they've been overly academic, and there's no harm in learning foundational knowledge, but it's not brought them challenge. But it's a little bit like saying to your new sort of fitness instructor, push me hard, and then you have the first session and you go, right, stop this for a game of soldiers. And I think that's that interesting moment where I've really started to understand, particularly over the last decade, the setup for expectation about the quality of the work is a massive deal for me now, because otherwise I realize we can get there and then it's a surprise. And doing that lead in and getting that right, even at what I call the sales pitch, where I haven't got the gig yet, but let me be really blunt about what it feels like. Because if you give me the gig and you think it's going to be easier than it is, you're going to be really disappointed with me. So that's that honesty space, I think, is very important.
Yeah, and usually that work is, it could be the work is driven by, maybe a dysfunction in the team, or it could be about, a great opportunity in the marketplace, or the business has fallen back a little bit, or there's a new CEO or a new senior leader in the role. So those could all be grounds. My approach is to sort of come in and, speak with those stakeholders so that I understand, how they see the world, the team, the possibilities, the challenges, and the upside, and also the downside in a confident, it's not an interview, it's more of a conversation. And I've had over 1,000 of those in the last 15 years. And then with that team, it's a confidential conversation, but then with their permission, with the leadership team's permission, I consolidate that feedback as verbatim as I can without giving away the source in a document which I call a perception consolidation. And then it's more of a, obviously it's a subjective thing. It's how they view their strategy, or how they view the identity of the team, or how they view what's happening. But what's happening then is I share that then back with the senior leader, and we go through that. And there are no names in there except the senior leader, because that's part of the contract. Is they're often interested in learning, how does the team really perceive me? And then they also set an example by saying, well, Julie is, visionary and exciting and as full of ideas. On the other side, she interrupts a lot. So there's a salt and pepper of that senior leader, but that also sets the tone of, this is what it's going to be like. The senior leader is also willing to take feedback, both pro and con, and make that available to the team. And then that perception consolidation gets introduced to the team on the first evening or morning of the conversation. So they'll read through that. So all the comments that they shared, and I seem to have an ability to bring out what people really want to talk about. I mean, really the tough issues that maybe laden the team for a year or longer. And then it's in that perception consolidation. We know that those things, when they're brought to light, it's much easier then to step into it. Because if we come to a point where people say like, well, that's not really an issue now. Say like, well, wait a minute, let's go back to perception consolidation. When you talked about, alignment on the strategy, and you said that nobody's really aligned, not you, but there were 4 people that said that here. So what's happening now? So have we reached the point of friendly avoidance? Where groups sort of self-protect, the country club thing, or you don't tell somebody when they've got ketchup on their shirt, which is sometimes strange.
I like that, but I think what this tells me about you is that I think there's something here that the process is the process. If we look at anything like this, there's some form of diagnostic, there's some form of feedback, there's some sort of interaction, and then as a physical process, doing a program of work like this is, it's almost like taking your car in to get it serviced. You drive it in, you drop it off, you blah, 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 blah. But actually, what is it about that mechanic that you trust? Mm-hmm. Right? What is it about that interaction? And I think that's one of the big things for me, that I'm intrigued as to if you have a consciousness around the trust element in yourself as a instigator, a catalyst, a guide, the counsel, that multifaceted role that I think exists at that senior level. Because, when people turn up to do work with organizations, everybody says, I saved 3 kids from a burning building on the way over. I will, everybody's going, I'm great, right? And I just wonder if you have a sense of, or maybe what that feedback has been around you that says, it's not, the process is solid, but actually it's the interaction with you. And I wonder if you have a sense of how you engender that trust, because I think that's the biggest thing. Because I can give somebody feedback, somebody else can give somebody feedback, but why is it received? It's not the accuracy of it per se, though that is right. It's the manner of it and the way it's being held and offered. And I just wonder if you have a sense of your own approach, which I'm sure you do. It'd be great. It'd be great to hear.
That's a very thoughtful question, and I will profit from that question for the next couple of weeks, because I'll reflect on that. I can share a couple of thoughts that are on my mind. I really appreciate that, Guy. I think that the work that I do with leadership teams is appreciated because I have their interests in mind and not my agenda, as much as I can as a human being. And the program that we're doing, or the work that we're doing, or what we're addressing is usually only about maybe 18 meters ahead of their train where they're at. So it means that it's not hectic, and they often don't know this, but there's a tremendous, let's say, fitting and choosing and aligning and topics, even with all the preparation. When the big game comes, if they throw up a different defense to you, then you've got to make adjustments on the field right there to be successful. And I think that my ability to be extremely flexible and have quite a deep repertoire of tools that really work, and that they can use and that they can duplicate. And some really sharp guys like Frank Zima, he's the CEO of Evis Motor Systems, firm based in Munich, and Dr. Ray Heinen, he's a nuclear engineer. And Ray would say something like, gosh, what Dan does, it isn't rocket science, but it works. It works. And sometimes guys are frustrated because they think, why didn't I think of that? And so I'm not trying to say I'm any kind of genie or something like that, but I know that as a leader, you've got to have things that are simple to use and to work with. And my work is with leadership teams and helping them improve and get better, and then enabling the rest of the organization. But the deeper piece here, the real deeper piece, and maybe we do something in another conversation, I'm really interested on your thoughts on this whole topic of ownership. It's really about, people talk about engagement, and there's a lot of commercial enterprises around measuring engagement, improving engagement. I think beyond engagement is ownership. And how do we create deeper ownership in the leadership teams for what really needs to be managed? And how does that then cascade out? And the secret to leadership, and this is coming back to the other nuance and part of my practice where I think I'm different, is the secret to ownership, getting people to take ownership, is that they have a choice to take it. We can't delegate it. We can't push it on people, but people choose. And so in my work, in my design, whether it's strategy or communication or alignment or transformation, I'm always trying to create situations in the learning environment where people get to choose which way we go. So we can do it this way, we can do it this way. And it doesn't look hectic, and they don't even know they're getting a choice, but they're making a subtle choice. And then they said, and what's happening subconsciously, I've chosen it. That's the way. I want to go that way, and I'll own the results. So I think that's really a subtle thing, is this giving people choice. When people don't feel they have choices, they're stressed, they start to conform, they perform at a level that is more compliant than commitment level. And I think giving people choices is a powerful way to create ownership.
Yeah, and you and I could go on, give me some good food and a bottle of wine, and you and I could go on for the next couple of days. So
Beer garden's about 200 meters away, and I hope to see you this summer. Yeah. I really hope to see you. I think
we'll do another one of these. I think so. I won't try and shoehorn it all in now, but yeah, there is something about that making choices, and there is something about we're in a society where I think choice is a very interesting thing. Freedom. What freedom to do what exactly? Right? You've got to work. Unless you're just independently wealthy. So that's a good portion of your life taken up. And then when you're at work, you basically got to do what you're told, more or less. You can have an opinion, but and I think people's relationship with choice. All the promises of, back in the day, I saw hover cars and thought I'd have one by now, when I was watching TV kind of thing. And so the promise of the future and the promise of freedom, mobile phones will give you freedom. Well, they didn't, did they? They tied you down, and smartphones will make work faster and easier. It just meant that we had to do more, So where is my choice? And one of the things I'm fascinated by is this idea of mandated discretionary effort. Which is, how much of what I'm doing is my own discretion. Pay me to knock 9 nails into a piece of wood. That's fine. That's the job role. But when I hear about choice, but I might choose to think about it over the weekend. I might choose to give it headspace. But if I haven't come up with an idea pretty soon because you floated the idea and actually, you go, oh God, what were your thoughts on that? Oh, I'm supposed to have an idea. What I mean by that is, if you mandate things for me, if I'm going to be penalized for not contributing at a certain level, then all of a sudden, I can be answering emails at 11 o'clock at night. I can be, et cetera, because every other person is. And then all of a sudden, where are my choices about where my free headspace is? Because we're so busy. So I have to think about it and I have to reply. So this idea about accountability, fine. Ownership, yeah, but choice. That's a very interesting. I just noted it down, because intellectually accountable, yeah, I'm accountable, but actually it's my relationship with choice. How much room are you giving me to choose? And that's a fascinating topic.
That's a lot of it, and then I'll talk with senior leaders and they'll say, I really want to develop a culture of more ownership. in my organization. This is really important. And, ownership has a give and take. It's not just about, we talk about engagement and then, responsibility and accountability and ownership. And I'll say to a guy, well, ownership, and that's a, span of control that I can do my job. And by the way, if, a guy who's leading one of your projects in the day, let's say 18 months ago, needed to fly to Rome to meet with a client, how many windows would he have to jump through before he had approval to fly to Rome? He might be managing a 15 million euro project. And sometimes I'll point out these examples to a senior leader that, this guy who's managing a 15 million euro project has to go through 7 different people to spend 400 euros to fly to Rome. And talking about ownership, you're only going to be putting, dirt on top of your head. So I'm not saying that we have to have some controls and measures and guidelines and things like that. What usually happens, things loosen up, somebody abuses it, and then things contract. But ownership is where it's going, and with choice. And even going back to the guy who's pounding the nails in, I mean, maybe his job won't change tomorrow with pounding nails, but if I'm the leader that wants to enable that guy to do the nails the right way, what I might do is bring a potential customer in and say, Charlie Carpenter, this is the guy you're building that house for. And he and his wife, this is their first house, and they got a brand new baby. And I just wanted you to meet them because you're doing significant work that's helping them. Now, right there, the leader has enabled this guy to think, now I can still go around pounding nails and maybe cutting corners and putting a bad piece of wood in that house. But I can tell you what, the large majority of people, they want to do the right thing and they want to serve the customer. That's another major message in my book is, how do you put the customer really, not just become customer centric or customer focused, but how do you put the customer at the center of everything you do? And when you do, that creates a sort of literacy. You talked earlier about language and creative language. Putting the customer at the center of everything you do is a type of literacy that connects people to a common purpose. And then maybe you have to outline what we're going to do, our strategic priorities, but how you do it, is not only my individual choice because I have to interrelate with other functions that also serve that customer. So that's tough work. Choice is the first part, but the second part is what happens when your choice, and say we're doing a work together on a, cross, US, German, British conglomerate leadership team, and you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience. I do too. And, we also have to, make choice about how we collaborate, how we align so the client gets the best experience, for example.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this, and I'm going to not go too far with it because I think it's, but I think for me it always helps when I put things into I often sketch out little models just to help me make sense of what it was. I can feel one forming in front of me, so I won't distract myself too far.
Fantastic.
But listen, Dan, we've been chatting for some time. I think I'm going to bring us to a natural conclusion. I'm going to, I think we'll do another one of these if you've got an appetite to do it.
I'm really energized speaking with you. You're a very deep thinker and thoughtful, and I'm profiting immensely. And hopefully the listeners are maybe sketching out a few ideas if they're not driving a car when they listen to this, or so very, very, very insightful.
Well, that's just it. And Dan, I'm the reason I'd like to do another one is I think I'm getting absolutely as much value from you as if you're getting anything from me. So, I reflect that back to you. So listen, Dan, just if people want to seek you out, where's I'll put this in the description, but where do they go to find out more about Dan?
Well, on the public platform, I enjoy sharing and exchanging on LinkedIn. I do a sort of a weekly video on Thursdays there, a little snippet, Norenberg's 90 Seconds. And
I love those.
Also engaged in talking to people there. I have a website. It's dannorenberg.com, which you'll find some other resources there, and with my email and my phone number, you can reach out with me there. And just starting, I'll be putting a lot of original content video on my YouTube platform, which is just starting, but that would be helpful if people would like to get access to stuff coming to them on a regular basis, just short snippets that they can subscribe to the YouTube channel and also get things automatically. Or just reach out and give me a call. I'm always interested in conversations and learning and exchanging and offering help where I can.
Perfect. Well, I'll put all of those links in the description. And listen, as I say, thank you for that time. I think if anybody has listened to this, everybody gets different experiences when they listen to these episodes because of the characters that I have on. But just on a personal note, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've loved the energy, and I think we're tip of the iceberg as to what we can talk about. So we might do a few more of these. But just on a personal note, thank you so much, Dan.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for your time, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I mean, I'm saying that I really appreciate what you're doing. It's heartfelt, it's thoughtful, it's intellectually clear, and you're just doing a lot of good work that's helping. It's certainly helping me, and I believe it's helping a lot of people. So stay on that track. I'd love to come back and talk with you again.
I'm sure we will, Dan. So once again, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness, and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.